When Yeshua stood before the people on the hills of Galilee, he spoke words that would echo through the ages. He said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not even the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the Torah until all is accomplished." Those who heard him that day understood what he meant. To them, Torah was not a burden, but a way of life. Yet centuries later, that statement would be twisted, redefined, and used to justify an entirely different faith. And so, we must return to that moment and ask, what did Yeshua truly mean when he said he came to fulfill the Torah? In Hebrew understanding, to fulfill means to uphold, to establish, to bring to fullness. The word lekayim speaks of confirming something as valid and alive. It was never about ending or replacing Torah. In fact, among the rabbis, the expression to fulfill the Torah meant to live it correctly, while to abolish it meant to misinterpret or break it. Yeshua came not to replace it, but to restore it to its rightful purpose. Torah means instruction, guidance, or teaching. It is Yahweh's wisdom expressed as a pattern for life. Psalm 19 says, "The Torah of Yahweh is perfect, restoring the soul." It was never meant to crush mankind under regulations, but to reveal how to live in alignment with the Creator's will. Every commandment, every law carried the same heartbeat: to love Yahweh with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. When Torah was given through Moses at Sinai, it was not just a law book. It was a covenant between heaven and earth. Yahweh said, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." This covenant was not limited to bloodline or tribe. Even then, a mixed multitude of non-Hebrews came out of Egypt with Israel and were invited into the same covenant. The Torah said, "There shall be one law for the native, born, and for the stranger who dwells among you." So the covenant was always open to all who would come in faith and obedience. Before Yeshua's time, those who came from the nations but desired to follow the God of Abraham were called Gerim, sojourners. They were not excluded. Ruth, the Moabite, declared to Naomi, "Your people will be my people, and your God my God." She became part of Israel not by birth but by covenant faithfulness. This shows that the invitation was never about ethnicity, but obedience. The Torah was for anyone who would humble themselves before the Most High. Yeshua lived as a Torah, observant Jew. He wore the fringes commanded in Numbers 15. He kept the appointed times of Yahweh, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. He honored the Sabbath, not as ritual but as life. When he healed on the Sabbath, it was not rebellion. It was revelation. He showed that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. His actions restored compassion to commandments that had been hardened by tradition. When Yeshua said, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," he was not contradicting Moses. He was rescuing Torah from human corruption. He showed that the real battlefield of sin begins in the heart. Anger leads to murder. Lust leads to adultery. Pride leads to hypocrisy. He brought Torah back to its true intent, written not only on stone, but on living hearts. Through the prophets, Yahweh had already promised a renewal of this covenant. In Jeremiah 31 he said, "I will put my Torah within them and write it on their hearts." Ezekiel spoke the same truth. "I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes." Yeshua came to make this possible, to restore obedience through inner transformation. But after his ascension, the story took a darker turn. The Hebrew message began to fade as it entered the Greek and Roman world. The apostles who walked with Yeshua continued keeping Torah, but their writings were later read through foreign lenses. Among those who reshaped the message was Paul of Tarsus. Paul was a Roman citizen who used Greek reasoning to interpret the Hebrew message. His letters promoted the idea that believers were no longer under the Torah, that the old had passed away and was replaced by a new order centered on faith alone. He taught that obedience to law was bondage and submission to Roman authority was righteousness. In doing so, he redirected the faith from divine governance to state governance, from obedience to Torah to compliance with empire. His own words admitted this shift. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. This teaching aligned perfectly with Rome's agenda to control through religion. Paul's writings gave Rome the theological foundation to merge politics and religion. Constantine later took that vision and institutionalized it. Under his rule, Sabbath was outlawed and replaced with the Roman day of the sun. Passover was banned and replaced with Easter. And at the Council of Nicaea, it was declared that followers of Yeshua should have nothing in common with the customs of the Jews. What began as the way of Yeshua became the religion of Caesar. Now, let us return to the foundation, the sacrifices and blood of the Tanak. What did they mean? In the Torah, blood symbolized life. Yahweh said, "The life of the creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls." The purpose of sacrifice was never to appease an angry deity, but to restore broken relationship. When one sinned, the life of an innocent animal was offered as a substitute, not because Yahweh desired death, but because sin produced death. The shedding of blood represented the transfer of guilt and the restoration of life through obedience. The priests would lay their hands on the animal, symbolically transferring guilt. The blood was sprinkled on the altar to signify that life had been offered for life. Yet the prophets later declared that this ritual meant nothing without obedience. "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," Yahweh said through Hosea. It was never about the death of the animal, but about the heart of the person returning to righteousness. Yeshua's death followed this same divine pattern. He became the living fulfillment of what the sacrifices pointed to. He was not replacing Torah, but revealing its depth. His blood was not magical, it was covenantal. When he said, "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins," he was echoing the words of Moses, who had sprinkled blood on the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you." So his death was not the end of Torah, but the restoration of it. He did not remove the need for obedience. He removed the barrier that kept us from walking in it. The veil was torn, not to abolish the covenant, but to bring us closer into it. Through his offering, the way was reopened for every heart to be reconciled with the Father. But the Greco-Roman Church turned this act of restoration into an abstract formula. They claimed that belief alone was enough, that obedience no longer mattered. Under this system, Torah became obsolete, replaced by faith defined through creed and authority defined through Rome. This was never Yeshua's message. He called for transformation, not theology. He called for disciples who would walk as he walked, not merely believe as others dictated. The early Hebrew followers of Yeshua continued in the Torah. Acts 20:1 records that thousands of believers were zealous for the law. They saw no conflict between faith in Messiah and obedience to the commandments. But as the Roman system gained power, these voices were silenced, replaced by doctrines that glorified empire and dismissed Torah as bondage. And yet, Yeshua's words have never changed. He said, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but not one jot or tittle will pass from the Torah until all is accomplished." He made it clear that the standard of righteousness remains the same. Sin is still lawlessness, and righteousness is still obedience born of love. Today, many say we are under grace, not under law. But grace without law is chaos. Grace gives us power to obey, not permission to rebel. It is the divine favor that restores what sin corrupted. Paul's distortion turned grace into license, but Yeshua revealed grace as empowerment. Through the Spirit, we are called to live the Torah from within, with hearts of flesh instead of stone. So, can non-Hebrews follow Torah? Absolutely. The covenant was always for all nations. Isaiah 56 says, "Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh say, Yahweh will surely separate me from his people." Yahweh's house was to be a house of prayer for all nations. The Torah was not a wall to keep people out, but a doorway to bring people in. It defines righteousness, justice, mercy, and truth, qualities that never expire. To walk in Torah today does not mean reviving temple rituals. The blood sacrifices served their purpose as shadows pointing to the greater reality fulfilled in Yeshua's obedience. The moral and spiritual instructions, however, remain eternal. We are still called to honesty, purity, humility, compassion, and reverence. These are the heartbeat of the Torah and the character of the Messiah. When we keep Sabbath, when we honor our parents, when we refuse to lie or covet, we walk in the same truth Yeshua lived. He did not create a new religion. He restored the way of life Yahweh had given from the beginning. To reject that way is to reject the very example Yeshua came to reveal. And now we stand at a crossroads. One path follows tradition built by councils, creeds, and empires. The other follows the living words of the Messiah who said, "Follow me." The first path leads to control, division, and confusion. The second leads to freedom, harmony, and life. So this is the call: return to the original way. Return to the teachings that Yeshua lived and demonstrated. Return to the covenant that never ended. Return to the Torah written on your heart by the Spirit of the living God. Let your faith be more than belief. Let it be obedience born of love, because heaven and earth still stand. And as long as they do, not one word from the Torah has failed. Yeshua fulfilled it. And now, through him, we are called to live it.